A freezing evening in Boston Harbor. Wind lashes the empty pier, biting through thick winter coats. Daniel Hayes, 40, a quiet single dad and harbor mechanic, finishes his long shift. His daughter Mia, 8, waits nearby, diligently doing her math homework in the heated truck. Suddenly, Daniel hears a piercing, desperate scream. A black luxury SUV is idling near the treacherous edge of the pier. A woman struggles violently with two dark shadows. One sharp shove and she falls toward the black, icy water. Daniel doesn't think. He runs. Seconds later, he dives. He has no idea he just saved a billionaire heiress. Destiny begun. Daniel Hayes was a man whose presence was often felt but rarely seen. A shadow moving through the salt-crusted industrial corridors of the Boston waterfront. At 41, Daniel carried the quiet, steady air of a man who had seen the inside of the world's most complex machines and understood the absolute, terrifying fragility of the systems that kept modern life running. He lived in a small, sunlight-starved apartment in South Boston, where the walls were lined with heavy, dog-eared books on fluid dynamics, and the floor was perpetually scattered with his daughter Mia's colorful building blocks. Every morning, before the city even began to stir, Daniel would stand at his small window, watching the gray light crawl across the Atlantic, holding a cup of black coffee that tasted of survival and bitter memories. He was a man who had learned to find peace in the monotony of a long day's work, finding a strange solace in the predictable hum of a well-maintained engine. Before the navy blue maintenance overalls and the heavy tool belt, Daniel had been a titan in his own right, a lead Marine helicopter mechanic who spent 10 long, grueling years in the high-decibel, high-stakes world of flight decks and roaring turbine engines. He had worked under the scorching sun of foreign deserts and in the cramped, oil-slicked hangars of aircraft carriers. His mind was a complex map of circuits, hydraulics, and thermodynamics. A brilliant engine that once operated at the highest levels of military logistics. He could listen to the hum of a rotor and tell you, down to the millimeter, which bolt was failing under the stress. He often thought of machines as living things. If you treated them with respect, they would keep you alive. But when he left the service, he didn't bring home medals of pride. He brought home a silent, stoic discipline that the civilian world didn't always understand. The transition to the quiet docks of Boston was not a defeat, but a tactical retreat to protect the only thing he had left. 6 years ago, the engine of his personal life stalled permanently. His wife, Elena, passed away after a sudden, devastating illness that no amount of engineering or prayer could solve. In the cold, hollow aftermath of his grief, Daniel realized that the high-pressure world of a career was fundamentally incompatible with the one thing Elena had left him, their 3-year-old daughter, Mia. He chose to disappear into the gray fog of the working class, trading his prestige and his military rank for a predictable hourly wage as a harbor mechanic. He wanted a life where he could be home by 5 p.m. to walk Mia from the school bus, a life where he could help her with her 4th-grade fractions without being interrupted by a tactical deployment order or a bureaucratic crisis. He was building a fortress of normalcy for his daughter, one quiet evening at a time, teaching her that character is a silent foundation, not a loud announcement. He preferred the honest scent of diesel fuel in old rope to the sterile, backstabbing air of a boardroom. To the people at the shipyard, Daniel was simply the mechanic, a nameless man in grease-stained fabric who arrived to fix a rusted hull or tighten the stubborn screws on a massive cargo crane. He didn't mind the invisibility. In fact, he found a certain profound comfort in it. He watched the ambitious world from a safe distance, seeing the frantic energy of people chasing a success he had already walked away from. He found solace in the honest weight of a wrench and the predictable physics of a well-oiled machine. He was the man who kept the harbor moving, the invisible hand that ensured the city's trade never faltered, all while remaining a ghost in his own life. He had become an expert at being forgotten, but his hands never forgot the precision of a hero. The local dock workers respected him for his silence and his skill, never suspecting that the man who shared their morning donuts was once the primary safeguard for million-dollar flight crews. Every rusted bolt he turned was a silent prayer for a better tomorrow, a future where Mia wouldn't have to know the hardness of the world he had seen. Mia, now 8, was his entire universe. She believed her father was a real-life superhero who could fix anything from a broken toy to a massive cargo ship with just a calm look and a steady hand. Every afternoon, she sat in the cab of his weathered Ford truck, the dashboard lights providing a warm, amber glow for her schoolwork. She watched him work through the oil-streaked windows, admiring the rhythmic precision of his movements. He was teaching her that the world was just a giant puzzle waiting to be solved with patience, observation, and a very steady hand. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the winter fog was rolling in thick and heavy, swallowing the lights of the Logan Airport runways across the water. Daniel was just wiping the final layer of grease from his hands, looking forward to a warm dinner and a quiet evening of reading with Mia. But as the first scream cut through the sound of the crashing waves, the mechanic vanished and the Marine woke up. He followed the shriek, not because it was his job, but because his instincts wouldn't let him walk away from a soul in distress. The black luxury SUV idling at the end of Pier 4 looked like a predatory shadow against the flickering orange streetlights. It was too sleek, too expensive for this industrial section of the harbor, where the air was thick with the scent of brine and old iron. Daniel's internal alarm, forged in a decade of military service, went off the second he saw the vehicle's rear door fly open with violent force. He heard the shouting, harsh, desperate sounds that had no business being on a quiet dock at 7 p.m. As he stepped out from the shadows of the garage, his senses sharpened into a tactical focus. He saw a woman being dragged toward the rusted metal railing, her movements erratic as she fought with a terrifying, raw intensity. She was no match for the two larger men holding her by the shoulders like she was nothing more than a piece of cargo. Daniel realized in a heartbeat that this wasn't an argument. It was a targeted professional act of violence. He began to run, his heavy work boots thudding against the asphalt like a drumbeat of approaching justice. The wind shrieked through the shipyard, but Daniel's focus was a laser. Before he could even shout a warning, the taller man gave a violent, final shove. Time seemed to slow down as the woman disappeared over the railing, a flash of her expensive wool coat vanishing into the black, churning abyss of the Atlantic. The attackers didn't wait to see the splash. They scrambled back into the SUV, the tires screaming as they fled into the thickening fog, leaving only the smell of burnt rubber and a chilling silence behind. Daniel didn't waste a single second. He didn't look at the license plate. He was already at the edge of the pier, his eyes locked on the spot where the water was swirling in a lethal, icy dance. He didn't think about the 40-degree temperature of the water or the fact that the harbor current was notoriously treacherous at this time of night. Without a single heartbeat of hesitation, he shed his heavy jacket and dove over the railing. The water hit him like a physical wall of stone, a shock so violent it threatened to stop his heart instantly. The Atlantic didn't just want the woman. It wanted to steal the heat from his bones and the breath from his lungs. He submerged into the lightless depths, the salt stinging his eyes, his hands sweeping through the current until he felt the heavy, waterlogged fabric of a coat. He grabbed her, his muscles already beginning to seize from the onset of hypothermia. But he forced his legs to kick toward the surface with a strength born of pure adrenaline and the memory of every rescue mission he had ever completed. The pressure in his ears was a deafening roar, but his grip remained like iron. The salt burned his lungs as he accidentally swallowed a mouthful of the harbor, but the Marine in him refused to surrender to the numbness. He broke the water, gasping for air that felt like liquid ice, and fought the rising tide to drag her unconscious body toward a service ladder. Every movement was a battle against the crushing weight of the water and the numbing cold that was slowing his mind to a crawl. The harbor was a dark, uncaring witness to the struggle. Using the rescue swimming techniques he had mastered in the Marines, he heaved her onto the low-floating dock, his own breath coming in ragged white gasps that bloomed in the freezing air. She was blue, her eyes closed, her pulse so faint it was nearly undetectable. Daniel didn't wait for permission or help. He began emergency CPR, the rhythmic counting of the compressions acting as a drumbeat in the silent, foggy night. "Come on," he hissed through chattering teeth. "Breathe. You do not die here today. Breathe. He felt the crunch of her ribs and the terrifying fragility of life beneath his hands. The world narrowed down to the rhythm of his hands and the girl watching from the truck. After what felt like an eternity, the woman's chest surged with a violent spasm. A jagged, wet cough echoed off the harbor walls, and she began to gasp for air, her eyes fluttering open to see a shivering, wet man hovering over her in the dark. High above on the pier, Daniel heard the distant, beautiful wail of sirens. Mia had used his phone to call 911 the moment she saw him hit the water. She was standing at the railing, her small face pale with fear, but her voice steady as she directed the first responders toward the service dock. When the paramedics arrived, they found a harbor mechanic wrapped in a dirty, discarded tarp, holding a stranger's hand while his daughter watched from the truck. Daniel stayed by her side until she was safely loaded into the ambulance. Then he quietly disappeared into the fog, not wanting a single thank you. The next morning, Daniel woke up to a Boston that was fundamentally and permanently changed. He turned on the small kitchen TV to check the weather, but every station was playing the same high-resolution headline. Billionaire heiress Sophia Carter survives violent kidnapping attempt at Boston Harbor. Daniel froze, a spoonful of cereal halfway to his mouth, as the face of the woman he had pulled from the water appeared on the screen in a glamorous professional portrait. Sophia Carter wasn't just wealthy, she was the face of the Carter Financial Group, a woman whose family had built the very skyline Daniel looked at every morning and funded the hospitals that had tried to save his wife. The irony was a physical weight in his chest. He was the most famous man in the city, and he didn't even know it yet. The news reports were playing grainy security footage from a nearby warehouse. It showed a man diving without a single moment's delay, a shadow in the night who moved with the tactical precision of a professional soldier. But the reporters had a problem. The ghost of the harbor had disappeared before the police could get a statement or even a name. Sophia Carter herself was being interviewed from a private hospital wing, her voice trembling as she described the brave man with the kind eyes who had saved her when the world went black. She insisted on finding him. Not to give a reward, she told the cameras, but to look the man who saved her life in the eyes and say thank you. The city was obsessed with the mystery of the invisible hero. The search paralyzed the city. Every mechanic, dock worker, and harbor pilot was being scrutinized by the media and the police. Reporters were knocking on every garage door, and social media sleuths were enhancing the blurry footage frame by frame. Daniel tried to go about his day, hoping his grease-stained face and quiet nature would keep him invisible. But the harbor is a tight-knit world where secrets have a short shelf life. By noon, the workers at the garage began to whisper as they watched the news footage on their phones. They recognized the scuffed work boots sitting by the heater. They recognized the old Ford truck in the background of the shot. They recognized the distinctive military gait of the man walking toward the edge. The quiet man they had shared coffee with was now the most wanted man in the country. The world wanted a saint, but Daniel was just a man who knew how to hold his breath when the world got heavy. Suddenly, the quiet, oil-scented alleyway near the docks was blocked by 3 satellite trucks and a dozen reporters with microphones, all looking for the marine mechanic. Daniel was cornered while trying to fix a faulty fuel pump on a lobster boat, the cameras flashing against his dirty coveralls. He was completely overwhelmed, his stoic marine exterior cracking under the pressure of the national spotlight. Reporters thrust microphones in his face, asking if he knew who she was when he jumped, or how much he expected to be paid for his heroism. Daniel looked at the camera, his expression one of genuine, unfiltered confusion. "I didn't know her name," he said quietly, his voice gravelly and honest. "I didn't know she had $1 to her name. I just knew she was drowning, and I was the only one there to stop it." Overnight, Daniel Hayes became the most famous man in Boston, the working-class hero who had risked his life for a billionaire without even asking for her identification. The city was captivated by the contrast. The man who lived in a small, salt-crusted apartment, saving the woman who lived in the penthouse with the bulletproof glass. Mia watched the television with wide, sparkling eyes, seeing the world finally recognize the hero she had lived with her entire life. But for Daniel, the attention felt like a physical burden. He didn't want to be a symbol. and he certainly didn't want the rewards being discussed on national talk shows. He realized his anonymity was dead, and with it, the quiet peace he had fought so hard to maintain for Mia's sake. The world was demanding to know the story of the man who chose the shadows over the spotlight. 2 days later, a motorcade of black armored sedans pulled into the grimy, oil-stained parking lot of the harbor docks, a sight so jarring it brought all work to a complete, stunned standstill. Sophia Carter stepped out, looking pale but elegant in a simple wool coat, her eyes immediately scanning the crowd of workers until they landed on Daniel. The meeting was broadcast live by every local news outlet, the entire city of Boston holding its breath as the heiress approached the mechanic. Daniel stood there, his hands tucked awkwardly into the pockets of his clean work shirt, feeling the weight of 1,000 cameras and the history of the city pressing down on him. Sophia didn't offer a check, a trophy, or a business card. She walked straight to him, ignored the grease on his sleeves, and took his calloused, worn hands in hers. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with a raw, honest emotion that silenced the clicking cameras of the paparazzi. She explained to the world that the attackers had been hired by a corporate rival to hold her for a 9-figure ransom and destabilize the company's stock. "You didn't just save my life, Daniel," she told the reporters, her eyes never leaving his. "You saved my family's future. You were the only one who didn't look away when the world got dark. You are the heartbeat of this city." She looked at him with an intensity that saw past the mechanic's uniform, realizing that her power came from bank accounts. But Daniel's power came from his soul. Sophia then turned to Mia, who was standing shyly behind her father, and knelt down on the dirty concrete to be at the little girl's eye level. She didn't treat her like a child of the docks. She treated her like the daughter of a king. She handed Mia a small silver pin, a Marine Corps emblem she had tracked down from Daniel's old unit, polished until it shone like a star. "Your father is the bravest man I have ever met," Sophia said softly to Mia. "I hope you grow up knowing that the world is a better place because he is in it." Mia beamed with pride, her hand gripping the silver pin as if it were a magical artifact that confirmed everything she had ever believed about her dad. The moment was electric, a bridge being built between two worlds that usually never touched. If you believe true skill doesn't need to shout, type, "I will live kindly." Sophia spent the entire afternoon at the docks, sitting on a wooden crate and listening to Daniel talk about the struggles of the harbor workers, the lack of health care, the aging equipment, and the fear of being replaced by automation. She realized that while she had been born into gold, Daniel was forged in iron. She saw a man who didn't want her money, but who deserved her absolute respect. She learned about Elena, about the loss that had driven Daniel into the shadows, and about the silence he used to protect his heart. She saw the man who had walked away from power to protect a child's laughter, and for the first time in her high-stakes life, she felt truly humbled. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the salt-crusted ships and the towering cranes, Sophia realized that a simple "thank you" would never be enough for a man who didn't want anything for himself. She saw the way Mia looked at her father and realized that Daniel was already rich in the only currency that mattered. But she also knew that the city needed more men like him, and she had a plan that would ensure Daniel's one rule would become a legacy that stretched far beyond the harbor pier. She made him a promise that day that his courage would not just be a headline, but a foundation for a better future for everyone who lived in the shadows of the skyscrapers. She saw the true value of the man in the overalls, and she was determined to make the world see it too. A week later, at a grand press conference in front of the historic State House, Sophia Carter revealed the Hayes Initiative. She announced the creation of a $20 million foundation specifically designed to support the families of single parents and veterans across the state of Massachusetts. The foundation would provide scholarships, emergency medical funds, and housing assistance, directing resources to the very people Daniel had spent his life defending in silence. It was a mission of repair, not of machinery, but of human lives. The city cheered, but the real shock was yet to come. The billionaire wasn't just giving money, she was giving authority to the man she trusted with her life. The real surprise came when she invited Daniel Hayes to the stage and offered him the position of Director of Operations for the entire foundation. Daniel stood at the podium, looking out over the city that now knew his name, and he looked completely stunned, like a man caught in a storm he couldn't outrun. He initially tried to refuse, his voice barely a whisper into the microphone. "I'm a mechanic, Sophia. I fix engines and I change oil. I don't know the first thing about running a foundation or managing millions of dollars. I belong at the docks, where things make sense and the tide is predictable." Sophia stepped forward, her hand on his arm, and spoke into the microphone so the whole city could hear her conviction. "Daniel, I have 1,000 MBAs in my office," she said with a warm, genuine smile. "But I only know one man who knows how to fix what's really broken in the city. I need your integrity, not your resume. I need the man who dives into the dark when everyone else runs for the light. Your hands might be stained with grease, but your soul is made of gold. You fix engines, now help me fix families." The logic was undeniable, and the emotion was overwhelming. Every family in Boston who had ever felt invisible suddenly had a champion who knew their names. Mia, sitting in the front row next to the mayor, stood up on her chair and shouted, "Go for it, Daddy! You're the best fixer in the whole world!" The crowd erupted in a standing ovation that lasted for 5 minutes, a sound that could be heard all the way back to the harbor docks. Daniel accepted the role, and over the next year, the foundation became a beacon of hope for thousands of families. He didn't move to a mansion or buy a luxury car. He stayed in his harbor apartment, but he ensured that every kid on the docks had a shot at a better future. He traded his grease-stained coveralls for a suit, but his hands remained rough, and his eyes still carried the quiet strength of the Marine who dove into the dark. Months later, Daniel stands quietly beside Sophia during the opening ceremony of the First Hayes Community Center. He looks at Mia, who is in the front row wearing her silver pin, smiling proudly at the man who fixed more than just machines. He looks at Sophia, and there is a look of mutual respect that hints at a friendship, or perhaps something more, that will last a lifetime. He thought he was simply rescuing a stranger from icy water. She thought her life was about to end. Neither of them expected that one brave moment on a dark harbor would change the future of thousands of families and teach an entire city that the most valuable person in the room is often the one who never tries to prove it. The final voiceover whispers as the screen fades into a warm, golden Boston sunset over the water. They laughed when the quiet technician stepped forward. They thought he was just another maintenance worker. But sometimes the calmest voice in the room is the one that saves everyone. Daniel Hayes was no longer the invisible man of the harbor. He was the light that refused to go out, proving that the greatest engines in the world are fueled by kindness, and the strongest hands are the ones that reach out to help. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Chip Healing Stories, where quiet heroes change everything.